Hi, welcome to Avail's Landlording You. We are Chris and Eli of Landlord Gurus, and we're here to talk about how to approve or deny a person's rental application. In this episode, we will cover some of the legal reasons to deny a tenant's application, we'll provide a few tips on how to determine who to approve or deny based on the rental application and their screening reports. And then finally, we'll go over a few common questions we often hear from landlords about this topic. Eli, why don't you take it away?
Okay, thanks, Chris. To start, I'll quickly go through some of the most common reasons to deny an applicant. One of the most common reasons to deny an applicant is if they have not completely or inaccurately filled out the application, which just means you don't have the right information to make your decision. Another is if they have inadequate or unverifiable income. That might be because they don't earn enough to be able to afford the place. Usually we set about a 3-to-1 gross income to rent ratio as a guideline, or you're just not able to verify the source and amount of their income. You can't be sure that they have that. Additionally, you might turn somebody down if they have a lack of rental or employment references, or if some of those references don't reflect well on them. There's also a case where an applicant has a prior eviction or a bankruptcy. Traditionally, a eviction would be absolute on somebody's record would be an absolute no-go to rent to, but you do need to make sure that you know what your local laws are. Things are changing rapidly around around the country, really, and in some cases, you're not allowed to take eviction or bankruptcy into account. The applicant doesn't meet some selection criteria that you have set. And some examples of some of these criteria might be that they have pets, where you have a no pet policy in your building. But note that pets are different than service or emotional support animals, and you cannot exclude service or emotional support animals based on the fact that you have a no pet policy. They're different.
Right.
Or they smoke, where you have a no smoking policy. And also take note that vaping is increasingly common, and it's good to be very explicit about whether or not you allow that, and communicate that with your potential tenants as well. Additionally, in some cases, an applicant's credit score may be lower than the minimum threshold that you've set for acceptance. I require a credit score of 650 or above, for example, but note that this is also changing. The laws pertaining to credit scores are changing around the country. In Portland, for example, the city mandates that anything above a 500 score on your credit report is high enough, and that a landlord must not use that as a reason to disqualify somebody. So those are some comments.
Yeah, thanks, Eli. Yeah, I'll just jump in and reiterate to make sure you're not choosing or denying applicants in violation of HUD's Fair Housing Act, which protects certain classes of people from discrimination. So make sure you understand that Fair Housing Act and don't run afoul of the rules. We have a few tips on how we generally determine who to approve and deny based on their rental application and screening reports. So tip one, our first tip is to create a rental criteria checklist in advance of listing and showing your property. So then once you run their screening report, you can easily determine whether the applicant has met your criteria or not, providing you with the information you need to approve or deny them. We'll just list off some examples of some common criteria here. So for example, you should have an income criteria or a minimum income to rent ratio criteria. So for example, I personally use a 3-to-1 income to rent ratio. So if the rent is, say, $1,000 per month, the applicant must then earn at least $3,000 per month. Another piece of criteria might be a minimum credit score or credit history. So for me, I use 620 for one of my properties. Eli had said that he does 650. So, and I have used 650 as well for other properties. So it just sort of depends on what you're comfortable with, and it might be specific for a particular property. Another example in your criteria checklist would be a background check and what might be considered disqualifying if that is allowed where you are. So for example, a lot of landlords would consider, like Eli had mentioned, a convicted sex offense to be reason to deny. So if that is the case, make sure you explicitly state that in your criteria, and make sure that you are following the rules when you put that in there. Next would be eviction history. So similarly, if you're allowed to consider whether a prior conviction would disqualify an applicant, now you're going to want to state that here. Income documentation. So state what forms of documentation need to be provided to prove their income, whether that's pay stubs or a W-2, or tax return, bank statements, etc. So whatever it is that you need to see, make sure you state that in your criteria. And then you can also have other criteria that we haven't talked about, things such as pets, smoking or non-smoking, etc. But just make sure to exercise caution here about any bias in establishing these criteria, and then how you're going to measure that.
Exactly, and that's a mention back to the HUD fair housing laws. You want to be abreast of those.
Exactly.
Sure, that's what where bias is going to be particularly dangerous. You have to be careful of it. Okay, our tip number 2 is to employ a pre-screening process, which I find invaluable. So what this does is it narrows down your pool of applicants to those that will meet your most basic requirements. This saves a lot of everyone's time because you're not showing or taking applications from people who would never qualify. So for both Chris and I, this is a list of questions that we send to each potential applicant before we even schedule a viewing. The questions I use include, do they have any animals? Do they have, how much income do they earn? And this is the combination of earnings between the adults who would be on the lease. Does anyone who would be living at the unit smoke or vape in any way? And what is their desired move-in date? So by the time I get through each of those questions, then I have things narrowed down pretty significantly. I will send that list of questions immediately upon an inquiry coming in from Zillow or one of the other listing platforms. And only once I have received their answers to that and confirmed that they meet the criteria that I've set for each of those topics, do I then move to schedule a showing and send an application and that type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great tip. It just saves everybody a bunch of time and makes sure that everyone's on the same page before we get too far down the road. If you do deny an applicant, you ought to provide a denial letter. So Avail, again, has one that you can download, and they'll provide a link to that here in this description. And then furthermore, if you're basing the denial on something found in their credit report, you are legally bound to send them a denial letter that explains this decision. You'll also see that called an adverse action notice. So yeah, so those are our main tips to follow, and check them out.
Okay, now we'll answer a few common questions we get about accepting and denying applicants, and we'll share some of our experiences. So question 1 is, does an applicant always have to meet 100% of your rental criteria? Chris?
Yeah, so for me, the short answer is yes. Creating that rental criteria allows me to objectively consider what an applicant must meet in order for them to qualify. So I spend time in that, and I think about that, and it's there and it's fair. Additionally, if there are first-in-time rules, like we have here in Seattle, that's where landlords must accept the first applicant who meets your criteria. So we cannot change or relax that criteria for one applicant, but not another. So in practice, if you change your criteria for one applicant, then you need to, I guess theoretically, you need to open up the process up for everybody else again so that everybody else has a chance to meet that criteria.
Yeah, that's right. And in Seattle, and I think a lot of places, you're actually now required to list your criteria with your advertising, exactly, so that people know whether or not, if they read the entire listing and your criteria, they know whether or not they're able to apply. And it does save people time. My answer to this question is on a few points, to set alternative ways for applicants to meet certain criteria, such as allowing a cosigner, also known as a guarantor, when an applicant doesn't meet my minimum credit score requirements, or to give them the option to purchase rent guarantee insurance. And I will also allow employment or other references if they don't have enough rental references, which usually happens when somebody hasn't been renting for very long. They're younger or haven't been renting on their own for a long period of time. Another place I provide some flexibility is in documenting income. Where necessary, I've used documents such as tax returns, bank or investment statements, or even a job offer letter to document income.
Right. Okay. Yeah, great. Our next question is sort of similar to what Eli was mentioning there is what if an applicant is unable to authorize a screening report due to being international, say?
Right. This is another example where an applicant may not be able to meet all your screening requirements because an international applicant may not have a social security number or another form of taxpayer ID that they can use to order background and credit reports. They won't have a credit history in the United States, for example. So first, note that the Fair Housing Act prohibits landlords from refusing to rent to an international student or a tenant based specifically on their national origin. So make sure you stay on the right side of that. If an applicant is unable to authorize a credit or background check, consider requesting different documentation, such as a bank statement or other reference, such as a credit reference from an individual who's had a relationship with this person, or a prior landlord reference. A job offer letter, as I mentioned before, can also be used here where somebody is moving to the country for the purposes of taking a job. Also, consider the option of using a local guarantor or cosigner. I did this with a Ugandan family fairly recently who is living in one of my buildings, and somebody that they knew locally was willing to cosign for them.
Great. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and Avail has a great article about this as well. So check out the description here for a link to that as well.
Right. And our third question is, I feel bad denying their rental application because they're nice people. Should I give them a chance?
Yeah, in my experience, again, I think it's best to stick to your criteria in order to avoid, falling for a good story and then regretting it later. In my experience, I've encountered tenants, they're nice people, their intentions are good, and they really do want to be good tenants and pay on time and do everything else and fulfill their responsibilities. But for whatever reason, they find themselves in a position and they continue to find themselves in a position where they just for whatever reason cannot fulfill their obligations. And it's unfortunate, but I guess I keep in mind that this rental property is your business. And so you need to operate it like one. So that's sort of my overriding thought when it comes to that.
Right. And this is where I like to set alternative ways for people to qualify, but I still make sure that I have documented what those alternatives are, and I adhere to the alternative rules that I've set. That if credit score is too low, then I will accept a cosigner. I still have to document it all and follow my own guidelines, and that also keeps me in compliance with Seattle's first in time law. In addition, as Chris said, to running my business responsibly.
Exactly. So yeah, just remember to know your rules and make sure you are following them. So yeah, well, that's all we got time for today. We hope this has been helpful. Yeah, thanks for watching, everybody.
Thank you.